Hello and welcome to Medieval Murder, the podcast that brings all things gruesome and historical to the comfort of your own home or car or wherever it is you're listening from. My name is Hannah Purtymun and I'm here with my father Kevin Purtymun to discuss some of the most famous and infamous murders that took place in the medieval and early modern period. Medieval Murder came to be first as a blog, then as an Instagram, and now as a podcast after I finished my master's dissertation on homicide in early medieval England. The podcast will feature some of the most famous murders in medieval history, some mini-episode series on different types of medieval murders, and interviews with historians and history enthusiasts alike. Today we'll be talking about the mystery of the two princes in the Tower, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury. There has been stories for centuries that the two princes either were murdered in the Tower of London or just went missing and were never heard from again.
Could be interesting.
Yeah.
See what's happening.
Edward IV became the King of England on March 4th, 1461, and was a member of the House of York. In 1464, he married Elizabeth Woodville in a secret ceremony. 6 years later, in November of 1470, Edward V was born as heir to the English throne.
Do we know why it was a secret ceremony?
I don't think that his family approved of him marrying her, but then later that year he did make her queen consort.
So was he already king when he got married?
Yes.
Oh, then it doesn't matter what your family thinks. Just do it.
Yeah, apparently.
You're the man.
Yeah. At the time that Edward was born, his father was actually in exile in the Low Countries, as Henry VI, a member of the House of Lancaster, had briefly been proclaimed King of England. However, Edward IV returned home in 1471 and reclaimed the English crown and named his son Edward, Prince of Wales.
So, is there really true lineage to the throne? Like a lot of these stories we're reading, it's like people get exiled, someone takes over the throne. I mean, where we're at today, it would be interesting to know, is there like clear lineage? I mean, it seems like it switches sides of the family a lot.
It does, because in here there's the House of Lancaster and the House of York, both which have royal lineage. So it's switched back and forth between the House of York and the House of Lancaster. And so here, Edward IV was the House of York, whereas Henry VI, who took the throne for a little bit, was a member of the House of Lancaster. And eventually those two houses merge into the House of Tudor, which is what we still have today.
And they always seem like when stuff goes wrong, they have someone that will take them in some country that they can go to and hang out. You know,
Yeah.
like he went to the lowlands, probably like the Netherlands.
Yep.
Why is that? Is it like they've got relations there?
They probably have relations there, and they also probably don't want to start a war. You know, the Netherlands doesn't want to start a war with England over anything because they're going to get beat down.
What year is this?
This is 1470.
Okay, yeah, so Netherlands doesn't really take on England until like the 1600s.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Because his father was in exile, Edward V was actually born in Westminster Abbey, as his mother had sought sanctuary there. 3 years later, in August of 1473, his brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, was born. And surprisingly, his father did not have him named a prince, but as a Duke of York.
Wait. So his wife's pregnant, and he goes to the Netherlands and leaves her. I mean, she's living in seclusion while he's like in the Netherlands?
Yeah.
It's good to be a man.
Yeah. So the two brothers were not raised together, as Edward V was given his own household as a prince at Ludlow Castle in what is now Shropshire, England. Richard of Shrewsbury was raised separately, possibly with his 5 sisters.
Okay, but dad's back
Yeah.
on the throne.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you get a castle. Sweet.
If you're a prince.
Okay.
Richard of Shrewsbury was not named a prince, so he was just raised with his 5 sisters somewhere. Separately. And so Edward V was also not raised around his father or his mother. He was raised by his uncle, the Earl of Rivers.
Okay.
Or the Earl Rivers. Yeah. So Edward V was only 12 when news reached him of his father's death on the 14th of April, 1483. It's not known what King Edward IV died of, but theories include pneumonia, malaria, apoplexy, or even poisoning. But this poisoning is because there isn't a lot of medical knowledge at the time, and so if somebody died unexpectedly with no symptoms, they were like poison.
Well, and I mean, he's the King of England, and there is a lot of treachery behind the throne, so I can see where they'd make the jump to poison.
Yeah.
But we don't know.
Mm-mm.
That might be another podcast. What happened to him?
Maybe, but there's not a lot of documentation. After his father's death, Edward V was assumed as King of England. Located at Ludlow Castle, Edward V did not immediately set out to London, as his mother, Elizabeth Woodville, was there to take power for him and to begin the planning for his coronation.
Okay, so he's 12.
Yes.
His dad dies.
Yes.
Now he's King of England.
Mm-hmm.
And his mother kind of acting as a regent?
Kind of. She's setting the scene for her to become regent.
Okay.
Yes. But regent, that position, wasn't actually a thing in England. It was more of a thing in France, which is where Elizabeth Woodville grew up.
Oh.
Yes.
So she's French?
I think so. No guarantee on that.
Okay.
It wasn't until later in April that Edward V, along with his uncle, the Earl Rivers, set off for London. It is important to note that Elizabeth Woodville did not notify her husband's brother, Richard of Gloucester, of the king's death. Instead, he found out about it from another party. So that's how she's setting the scene for herself as regent. She's like, I'm not going to tell his uncle. I'm just going to start doing things so that I can be in charge.
So, but the Earl of Rivers is an uncle too.
But an uncle on the mother's side.
Okay, got it. And is the other son with the uncle on the father's side?
No, he's with his mother.
Okay.
Yeah. Once he had heard of it, however, Richard of Gloucester set out to meet Edward V and ride in with him to London in order to support his transition over to king. So on Wednesday, April 30th, Richard of Gloucester met Edward V at Stony Stratford, just north of London, and took guardianship of him there. When the entourage arrived in London, Edward V was established as the new King of England, and his uncle, Richard of Gloucester, was made the Lord Protector of the kingdom, as Edward was still so young. This was a disappointment to his mother, who had been attempting to set herself up as the regent for her son.
Oh.
Yeah.
Got it.
And so, because Richard of Gloucester made himself Lord Protector of the kingdom, Elizabeth Woodville again sought sanctuary in Westminster Abbey with her daughters and her son, Richard of Shrewsbury, because she doesn't know what's about to go down. She's I have no position now.
Okay, so she has no standing, so she's going to hide out in Westminster Abbey, and she's got the Duke, the other son, the Duke
Of
York with her.
Yeah.
Okay.
And his 5 sisters.
Okay.
He originally had 10 siblings, but most of them died.
All right.
Yeah. When he arrived in London, the young king took up residence at the Tower of London, which was not only a prison, but a royal castle. However, Richard of Gloucester did not stay with him at the Tower, but at his mother's residence elsewhere in London. Richard of Gloucester's mother. In order to provide some company to the young king, Richard of Gloucester sent a delegation to Westminster Abbey to convince Elizabeth Woodville to send the king's brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, out of sanctuary to join his brother at the Tower.
That's a power move, man. Shouldn't do it, because I'm thinking you're going to get both heirs to the throne in one place, a castle and a prison. This is bad. This is a bad idea.
Yeah, but eventually she complies, and Richard of Shrewsbury joins Edward V at the Tower. But she complies because there is an army surrounding Westminster Abbey. So she's like, this is my only option. Originally, Edward's coronation was set for May 4th, but Richard of Gloucester rearranged for it to be on June 24th, so that the new king could open Parliament on the following day. During one of the planning meetings at a royal council meeting held on June 9th, Bishop Stillington of Bath and Wells decided to address the royal council and claimed that Edward V could not be crowned as the King of England. Years earlier, before his marriage to Elizabeth Woodville, King Edward IV had also been secretly married to a woman named Eleanor Talbot, a marriage that was supposedly performed by Bishop Stillington himself. Eleanor Talbot had also still been alive during Edward IV's second marriage, thus making his marriage to Elizabeth illegitimate and all of his children bastards. This meant that Edward V had no rightful claim to the throne.
So I take it he didn't have any children with Elizabeth Talbot.
Eleanor Talbot.
Eleanor.
No, he did not. Because their marriage was probably only, if they were actually together, it was only about a year or two. And then he married Elizabeth Whitfield.
Now, at this time, is the King or Queen of England the head of the Church of England?
No.
Okay.
We're still Catholics here, and so it's the Pope.
Okay.
We're not.
So it'd still be a no-no to be married twice under that.
Yeah, no, we don't. We don't see divorce until Henry VIII, about 100 years later.
Okay.
Yeah. An unofficial parliament held that week declared that all of Edward IV's and Elizabeth Whitfield's children were illegitimate. After this was established, 5 days later, Edward V's uncle and protector of the realm, Richard of Gloucester, was persuaded to become King of England.
But he's only an uncle.
Yeah, so he's the king's brother.
So he's the king's brother, so... Okay, so he must have been like second in line to the throne when their father died.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. On June 22nd, in order to make Richard III's coronation more acceptable, sermons were given out at Paul's Cross and throughout London, which raised publicly the issue of the bastardy of Edward V and his siblings. They also put forward what the Bible said should be done in respect to bastardy. Which I'm not sure what that is, but that is what they said. And on June 26th, he was crowned King Richard III.
So there's a whole power play by Richard III.
So here's the two lines of thought. So some historians think that Richard III plotted this whole thing and took the crown. Other people think he was just an unassuming uncle who was trying to support his nephew, and suddenly the kingship fell in his lap. After Richard III's coronation, supposedly a secret meeting was held between the Dukes of Hastings, Rotherham, and Morton, in which they discussed their disapproval of the removal of Edward V from the throne. Later, at a Parliament meeting, Lord Hastings supposedly attempted to attack Richard III. It's more likely he told them of his disapproval with hostility. And then, the protector, Richard, cried out that a plot had been prepared against him and they had come with concealed weapons so that they could make the first attack. Then, soldiers who had been stationed there by the Lord and the Duke of Buckingham came running and beheaded Hastings by sword under the name of treason. And then the other two conspirators were imprisoned in Welsh castles.
So there was a conspiracy to remove Richard from the throne.
It wasn't necessarily even a conspiracy to remove him. It was more like, this is not cool.
And then we had the power to silence them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
A little politics going on there.
Yeah. A few weeks later, a supposed coup was being formed by the Duke of Buckingham. So the Duke of Buckingham is the one who beheaded Hastings. But now, a few weeks later, he's forming a coup. So according to an early 16th century account called the Divis Chronique, the Duke of Buckingham killed these children, hoping to become king himself, and this for the reason that he had read a prophecy about a future King Henry of England who would be very great and powerful, and he believed himself to be this, for he was called Henry. And some say also that this Henry, Earl of Buckingham, killed only one child and spared the other, which he then lifted from the front and had him secretly abducted out of the country. However, this was never proven. So there's a theory out there that the Duke of Buckingham, before trying to remove Richard III, was like, I'm going to kill the two princes in the tower.
Okay, yeah, that's my question. Like, who'd he kill? So we think he killed at least one of the princes, or maybe both?
Yeah, but there's no proof to that. That's just a theory in a 16th century account. So that was written 100 years later. So that's a theory 100 years later that the Duke of Buckingham was like, I'm going to do it. So even though it's not known if the Duke of Buckingham actually killed them, he was planning a coup. And so Richard III heard of the coup being planned and had the Duke of Buckingham captured and executed.
So while you're still in power, you just wipe out your enemies?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The fate of the two brothers, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury, remains unknown, but it does appear that at least Edward V did die in the late summer of 1483, because after that date, there is no documentation that he was ever seen again, but there is also no documentation that he was ever put to death. Several documents do seem to point towards his death, as he's referred to as the late king or as the late son of Edward IV. It is very possible, though, that he died of illness, as his doctor had been visiting the tower to see him frequently. However, Richard of Shrewsbury would not have died of illness because he seemed as healthy as a horse and was documented several times as being a healthy and gleeful boy.
And so one was 12.
And the other was 3 years younger.
Okay, so 9.
Yes.
And then what's the time frame? At what point does a 12-year-old disappear?
Just about 2 months later.
Okay, so he's still 12.
Yeah, no, he's still 12. He most likely dies before he hits 13.
Okay, and then the other one's 9, and we're not sure what happened to him.
Yeah.
But in these coup attempts and these plots, there's got to be a lot of killing going on.
Not really. I mean, it's just those 3 dudes.
Okay.
It's just, well, no, it's not even the 3 dudes. It's Lord Hastings is killed, and then the Duke of Buckingham is killed, but nobody else.
Do you think they cut off Lord Hastings' head right in Parliament?
Yeah, in that same room.
And is it the same Parliament they use today?
Probably not.
That's wild. That is, I mean, that is legislation taken to the next level, man.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. There were also supposed plots and attempts to kidnap the boys from the tower. Specifically, supposedly 4 men tried to abduct the 2 brothers from the tower by igniting diversionary fires around the tower to distract the guards. However, they were captured and were tried at Westminster Abbey, condemned to death, drawn to Tower Hill, and beheaded. And their heads were exhibited on London Bridge.
Ooh. So were they trying to rescue them or kidnap them or?
Probably so there's 2 lines of thought. They were either, if it happened, they were trying to kidnap them to put Edward V back on the throne, or they were trying to kidnap them for probably ransom.
Okay.
In 1485, so this is 2 years later, King Richard III was killed at the Battle of Bosworth, after which Henry VII of the House of Lancaster, eventually the House of Tudor, usurped the throne, which completely changed the political situation in England.
So do we know about him already from this story, Henry?
No, Henry's new.
Henry just pops in.
Yeah, Henry's here now.
Is he any relation to anybody going on here?
I mean, I think they're probably cousins.
Okay.
Because it's the House of York and then the House of Lancaster, so he's House of Lancaster over here.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll learn more about that in just a minute. So, as soon as he had been crowned King of England, Henry VII imprisoned Bishop Stillington, who had announced to the Royal Council that Edward IV had secretly married Eleanor, so his marriage to Elizabeth was illegitimate. So he imprisoned this dude to silence him. This was because Henry's claim to the throne was weak, and in order to strengthen it, he wanted to erase the ruling that Edward IV's children were illegitimate, and marry Edward IV's oldest daughter, who would then again be the heiress of the House of York, if he erased the earlier ruling. And then this was accomplished when his first act of parliament was to destroy the act of parliament that declared them illegitimate. So he comes in, he's like, I don't have a great claim to the throne right now. So I'm going to take the guy who claimed everybody was illegitimate, I'm going to imprison him and silence him. And then I'm going to make sure Parliament erases any fact that the other kids were bastards so that I can marry the oldest daughter.
So if he's going to marry the oldest daughter, he does all this. This is 2 years later.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and he erases that fact.
Mm-hmm.
The missing prince should actually be king.
Yes, so we come here now. Yes.
So maybe he killed the missing prince.
That's where we're at now, yes.
But he wasn't related to them in any way. He wasn't from the same house.
He's not in the same house, no.
Okay.
Yeah. So, however, this also meant that if either Edward V or Richard of Shrewsbury was still alive, they had an even better claim to the throne, meaning that Henry VII had an even better motive for killing the boys than anyone else. but there is no evidence that they were alive then, or that he had them killed. So in order to further the possibility that the boys were dead, so even Henry VII at this time as king doesn't know where the boys are. He doesn't know. So he, from 1502 onward, he proclaims the official version of their life story, which states clearly that both Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury were deceased, having been murdered 19 years earlier in 1483.
So is Mom around? We have any stuff about what Mom's doing? She seemed like, I mean, they're not like into their kids like we are today, but it seemed like she would be all about her two kids at least.
So Mom was pretty, I mean, she was disappointed when she wasn't made regent. I don't really know what happens to her after that. She's kind of disgraced, when Richard III becomes king. But now that Henry VII is king and he wants to marry her daughter, he brings her on again as the dowager queen.
Oh, nice.
So she has a little bit more power.
Did anybody look for the princess in the Netherlands or the Lowlands?
No.
Seemed like that might be a place they might be hanging out.
Yeah. So later, the Great Chronicle of London, which seems to have been completed in about 1512, cites 3 different rumors to the effect that the 2 boys may have been smothered in their feather beds, or possibly they were drowned in Malmsey wine, or maybe they were poisoned. They had an uncle that was drowned in Malmsey wine.
Okay.
Yeah. But the version of the story that has been the most upheld, but is also likely the least factual, was written by Thomas More, who was actually only 5 years old when the events actually occurred. He claimed that Sir James Tyrrell devised that they should be murdered in their beds. Sir James Tyrrell is the servant or one of the knights of Richard III. So they were claiming that Richard III had something to do with this. Sir James Tyrrell devised that they should be murdered in their beds, to the execution whereof he appointed Miles Forrest, one of the 4 that kept them, so one of the guards that kept the 2 boys. About midnight he came into the chamber and suddenly lapped them up among the clothes, so bewrapped them and entangled them, keeping them down by force, with the feather bed and pillows hard unto their mouths, that within a while, smothered and stifled, their breath failing, they have up to God their innocent souls into the joys of heaven, leaving to the tormentors their bodies dead in the bed.
I'm thinking he's like either one big dude, because I don't see anybody holding down a 9-year-old and 12-year-old, smothering them in their beds by themselves. There had to be somebody else involved.
I think there was supposedly 2 other people, but I don't have their names.
Probably 2 other guards that kept them.
Yeah. But this was written, 20 years after the fact by somebody who wasn't there, trying to get out there that Richard III was actually the murderer of these 2 young princes. And that's actually the story that has survived through most of history, but Richard III is the one who killed his nephews. But there is absolutely no proof.
Other than this story and rumors.
Yes. But there's a lot of rumors.
There is a lot of rumors around him. Like, there's a lot of possibilities that they, like you said, they could have died. One could have died of illness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they could have been scurried away and went to live in another country.
Well, my big thing is that even if Edward V died of illness, which, I think that's pretty likely, what happened to his brother? Did he also catch, like, a plague or something and die? Or, because there's no documentation of him being dead. There's only documentation of Edward V being dead, but maybe that's because Richard of Shrewsbury wasn't that important.
Well, do you think that, like, Mom, these years later, when the king's going to marry her daughter and she's going to become the dowager queen, just totally ignored the Duke of York? And just, like, silenced him, or just...
I think it's possible, but there's also a theory out there that one of those kidnapping attempts actually succeeded, and that maybe Edward V went back, or ended up back at the Tower, but maybe Richard of Shrewsbury was taken away. Because years later, during Henry VII's reign, somebody comes to him and claims to be Richard of Shrewsbury, and is like, I'm the lost prince. They think that he was actually somebody else, that he wasn't actually Richard of Shrewsbury, but either way, Henry VII put him to death.
Okay, so Henry VII.
Is the guy who came in after Richard III.
Okay, so that's who this guy shows up and says, hey, I'm actually the Duke of York.
Yeah.
That's a bad move if you're that guy, if you kind of know what's going on.
Yeah, which is why everybody's like, but why would you do that?
Just on the off chance it works out, I guess.
Yeah, but instead he's murdered. Either way, he's murdered. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still not like convinced that there's clear lineage to the throne.
There is. So they've actually done DNA evidence. So they've actually taken, hair fibers and such to do DNA evidence, which we'll actually discuss in a minute.
Well, I'm just thinking, just overall. I mean, we've had so many different. It seems like there's like several families over the years that are competing for the throne.
Yeah, and they all interbreed with each other.
But they bring in people from France occasionally, and
but those
Spain
are also royal blood.
Okay.
So they're all related.
All right, let's get to the DNA stuff. Yeah. Are we there? Or are we not there?
We're there.
Okay.
So, nearly 200 years after the boys' disappearance, the bones of 2 children were found underneath a set of stairs in the Tower of London. Believing that they were the bones of the 2 lost princes, they were placed in an urn and interred in Westminster Abbey. However, no one knows for sure if those are the boys' bones or even if they were murdered. And so DNA evidence has been attempted to take hairs from people to see if they could match them to the boys. They've done, this was in the 1930s when they took the bones out and they x-rayed them and stuff, and they think supposedly that they're bones of 2 boys about the right age to have died in 1483, but there was really no evidence that they were boys.
Well, I mean,
nothing was proven. Again, in 1487, somebody looked at their dental records, but that couldn't be proven. And so then somebody came in the 2000s and was trying to do the DNA evidence, and they found certain things, but there was no proof that these were the 2 boys whose bones are interred in there. And there's also been, since 200 years ago, when these 2 bodies were found, there's been a lot of other bodies of children about that age or teenagers found in the Tower of London.
So, I've never been to the Tower of London. Have you been?
Yes.
So, there's been a lot of bodies and bones found and stuff like you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Is it that massive that shit can just be hidden away like that?
I mean, we're talking hundreds of years, so yeah. I mean, but the other problem with the two bodies that were found and entered into an urn claiming to be the boys, it was found really deep down during a renovation at the tower in the 1600s. Found really deep down, and so it's actually also theorized that maybe it was like a pre-Roman burial because it was real down there.
So they found these bodies in the 1600s?
Yes.
Wow, and they were still in Westminster Abbey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking maybe they should do some new testing, but you said in 2000 they did it. I mean, maybe they should
They haven't fully examined it. They've done some testing with some other stuff. I don't think they found Elizabeth Woodville's body, so I think that's the struggle. They have descendants since her, so they could use more recent people, but then there's mutations and stuff too, so I think it's a little bit harder.
Well, do we know where their father's body is? I don't
think you can actually, according to what I read, you can't actually trace through the dad. You have to trace through the mother.
Oh.
For some reason.
So I think this is like something...
Or at least the technology they were using, I know for sure the latest was 2004.
I'm thinking, I think they need to send it to Ancestry.com. They got like a shitload of stuff.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like, so the man who did all of this was John Ashdown Hill, who's a world-renowned historian.
When was this?
This was in 2004, 2008. He's done a lot of the DNA evidence about bodies found relating to different royal lineage. He's one of the ones who actually found the bones of Richard III. He's a specialist in this area. Unfortunately, he did die in 2018.
well, he's got to have like a protege that could like take over.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm thinking, I'm not sure. I'm interested in this. I'm not sure if our listeners are, but I think we should inundate the British Museum with emails and say,
somebody should do this.
Let's get on this because we've got questions. We want answers.
Yeah.
We want answers because I'm really curious what happened to the second brother.
Yeah.
I mean, well, even the first. I mean, the first there's a lot of plausible things, but the other one just like disappearing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of theories out there that they were murdered by Richard III. There's a lot of theories out there that maybe they escaped. There's a lot of theories and there's no proof. And so historians everywhere have been kind of arguing about it for years. Even John Ashdown's book, he's calling out the other historians, being like, "You're wrong."
So, what do you have the name of that book in case our listeners want to read it?
I will put that in the listener notes.
Because that might be something. I mean, I'm kind of interested in seeing kind of what happened. I mean, we've got a lot of questions still, but it really is interesting about how people are trying to manipulate their way to the throne.
Yeah.
And I mean.
And it seemed, according to John Ashdown Hill, Richard III didn't really want the throne originally, and then he got it. Whereas other historians are like, he was aiming for the throne.
So we don't really know what Richard III's intentions were.
I mean, we don't know what anybody's intentions were.
But then he got replaced pretty quick by Henry VII.
That was, I think 3 years later, yeah. 2 years later.
So he didn't have a long time on the throne?
No, he didn't really achieve much. So now that you have all the evidence that has been found so far, you can decide for yourselves.
Send us a tweet or an email what you think happened.
Yeah.
And I mean, I kind of think, I don't know what to think at this point. I mean, one of the things I'm thinking is that the youngest son, the Duke of York, that he was pretty much silenced. I think he was still out there for a while.
Maybe.
He may have been sent in exile. This is my theory. He may have been sent in exile, but he may have been the guy that came up that Henry VII killed.
Yeah.
And the other one, I don't think he died of natural causes. I think something happened to him.
Well, and maybe neither one of them ever wanted to be king, and so they got kidnapped and escaped, and they just lived their lives happily somewhere else. Probably not, but you never know. They were probably murdered.
Yeah, I mean, but at like 12, thinking back to when I was like 9 or 12, someone would say, "You want to be the king?" And you would be like, "Nah, I want to do something else." I don't know.
But if you're raised in that environment,
that's true.
When your mother really wants power too, and she wants to be a regent so that you can be king,
It's probably pretty much what somebody else wants for you.
Yes. Yeah. So thank you for listening to Medieval Murder. If you have any listener questions, comments, or topic suggestions, especially if you have any theories, please feel free to reach out via our Twitter account @MurderMedieval, our Instagram account @MedievalMurder, or via email at info.medievalmurder@gmail.com. And if any of you are interested in rocking some Medieval Murder merchandise, take a look at our website, medievalmurder.org.
We got some nice merch on there, man. Got like the kind of the Halloween theme Medieval Murder. Got a werewolf on there. What else we got on it? Werewolf.
We got vampire.
Got
some Dracula.
Got to remember the Dracula thing. And then, if you send in your theories, who knows, we may discuss them.
Yeah.
All right.
Tune in later for our next podcast.